Shalom Aleichem. It's a pleasure to come back to be able to be mishtatef in this grace Ribi Kveit Shemaim and Habatzas Torah. Okay, so the topic we're going to talk about today is the Isser of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av and also B'Yemei Avelos. As we know, on Tisha B'Av, so there's two sets of halachas on Tisha B'Av. There's Dinei Tainis and there's Dinei Avelos. Tisha B'Av is a din of a Tainis Tzibur. And in that Nekuda, Shavuot Yom Kippur, I'm sure you've heard this in the previous shiurim, that there's an Isser of Achil and Shtia, and there's a din of Chameshes Einuyim, Shavuot Yom Kippur. B'nois after that, Chazal were also masaking Dini Avelus. Almost all the halachas that an oval has, Mishtogedach Terech Shiva, apply to Tisha B'Av. And one of the halachas that apply is the Isser of She'ela Shalem and the Isser of Talmud Torah. The same way an oval Terech Shiva is also a Talmud Torah, so too on Tisha B'Av this is a Talmud Torah. So the makar of this is a Gemara in Tainis on Daf Lam Damad Aleph. So the Gemara says on Daf Tainis Daf Lam Damad Aleph, Tarabon Kol mitzvahs hanayagas ba'avel nahagos b'Tisha B'Av. All the mitzvahs which are noig ba'avel are noig in Tisha B'Av. Aser b'achilu b'shtia u'b'sicha u'b'nilas asando u'b'tasher amita v'aser likros b'Torah b'neviim u'b'ksuvim v'lishnois b'mishnah b'talmud b'medrash b'alachos v'agados. So it's usher to learn all Chelkei Torah. And we paskin it's usher to learn even Dvarim She'einer Megilim. This is Isser Talmud Torah. Now the end of the brisa says, V'kairei b'kinois b'iyov u'b'dvarim haroim sheb'yirmiyah v'tinoikos sheb'esraban b'telim shum shenamar pikudei Hashem yishar m'samchei lev. So the brisa brings the pasuk of pikudei Hashem yishar m'samchei lev. So the way Rashi learns, and that seems to be the way the Shulchan Aruch is mashma, the Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev, that's the Nesinas Tam. Why there's an Isser Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av? Why did Chazal aser? Why did Chazal give Dini Avelus of Tisha B'Av the guy to aser Talmud Torah? And the answer is because Vibalt Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev, Torah is something. Torah brings simcha. Learning Torah brings simcha. So therefore, if a person learns Torah, he's going to be Isaac in simcha. That's a stira to the Niu Gavelus of Tisha B'Av. That's how Rashi learns the Gemara in Tainis. And I think part of the Marmakemis was the Marsha. The Marsha's Ma'ir, that the Lashon of Gemara is Nishmash because the Gemara brings the Bekudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev after the din of Tinekes Sheb'esraban B'Teilim. But it's not mashma on the Gemara. The Shulchan Aruch Taka changes it. The Shulchan Aruch Taka brings the Bekudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev on the Etzem din that a Tisha B'Av is also a Talmud Torah. The Gemara brings it on the din of Tinekes Sheb'esraban. So the Marsha says, Ilule Rashi, he would say that the Isser of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av is not mitzat simcha. The Gemara just brings simcha to explain why Tinekes Sheb'esraban is b'teilim by. But as far as the etzem din, why Talmud Torah is aser, that's b'tayim achrina. And then Marsha wants to say that there's a halacha that a person not supposed to be mesiach das from avelus. And the same way there's a halacha, there's a minig of an Isser malacha on Tisha B'Av, which has nothing to do with the b'samchei lev. That's on hesach hadas min avelus. So too Chazal aser Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av. Not mitzat simcha, mitzat that learning Torah would be considered a hesach hadas from avelus. That's how the Marsha says, but Marsha is saying not like Rashi, and like we mentioned, it's really not like the Shulchan Aruch also. The Shulchan Aruch learns like Rashi. The Shulchan Aruch says mufurish that the Bekudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev is in Nesinas Tam. Why Torah is aser? Okay, so in Divided we have a mufurish Gemara that there's an Isser Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av. Rashi and the Mashmois of the Shulchan Aruch is that the Isser is because Torah is misameach, and the Marsha says Yiluli Rashi he would say that the Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev is just the reason for Tinekes Sheb'esraban, and the reason why Torah is aser in Tisha B'Av is for the same reason why Malach is aser mitzad hesach hadas m'avelus. So let's go divide with Rashi, and we'll get back to the Mashal later on. Let's go divide with Rashi and the Shulchan Aruch that the Isser Talmud Torah in Tisha B'Av is mitzad simcha. Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev. Now the Gemara says, as is the halacha, that we're allowed to learn Dvarim Haroim, Chalokim in Yirmiyah, Iyov, Kinois, Perek Elam Agalchem. Things inyanim that are Hilchos Avelus, inyani Avelus, inyani Achorban, there's a had to learn Dvarim Haroim. Kipshuta, you would say that if the Isser of the Isser of learning Torah and Tisha B'Av is B'tzat Simcha, the reason why Dvarim Haroim is mutter is because that's not misameach. Dvarim Haroim is full of tsar, is full of inyanim that cause a person tsar. That's taka not misameach. That's what one would have said Kipshuta. However, there's a Merdeka Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan often art. He says that when we say Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev, when we say Pikudei Hashem Yishar M'samchei Lev, That's a mitzias. The mitzias of Torah is a Torah is misameach. It doesn't mean that some chalakim of Torah are misameach and some chalakim of Torah are not misameach. Torah is be'etzem misameach. The Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in the Teva, in the schoolas HaTorah, that every word of Torah is misameach. Eicha is also misameach. He doesn't say this. Efsher mikansulegen shtikla derech hajush that Yirmiyahu Navi, Eicha is part of Kisvei HaKodesh, and Yirmiyahu Navi, when he wrote Eicha, he had to be zeicha to a nevuah. Kisvei HaKodesh has to be written b'derech nevuah, b'derech Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh needs simcha. In order for a Navi to have nevuah, he has to be in a matzav of simcha. So this is the Mefarshim already, Meir, that Yirmiyahu Navi, b'shas he wrote Eicha, he was in a matzav of simcha, that he was able to be zeicha to a nevuah, to be zeicha to Ruach HaKodesh, in order to be able to incorporate Eicha b'teres Kisvei HaKodesh. So if it was written b'simcha, it's pasha that Eicha, the Torah that Eicha is, Avad is because we have the Pekudei Hashem Shar Masam Klev has no exceptions, and Avad the Torah of Eicha and the Torah of Dvarim is also the Sameach. So why is there had to learn Dvarim Arayim? So here the Aruch HaShulchan says that the truth is, if you look in Eis Gimel, he says America Lashon. V'lechein le'niyas da'itei da'in keinu. Tavadei gam b'limin ha'Torah yesh simcha, v'gam tzar b'yigiyas ha'Torah. Af la'yis ha'gadol. The truth is that every chiluk of limud Torah has simcha and has tsar. There's the simcha that a person has when he learns Torah, and there's the tsar of the yigiyah. Amnam ikar esek haTorah misameach es hanefesh Yisraeli av sheyesh le'tzar of the yigiyah b'shas ma'aser. The ikar esek haTorah that the yid learns Torah, it's beikar misameach. The tsar that he has in the yigiyah and the harvanya, that's batal leumas the simcha that he's masig b'shas the limud Torah. Then a few lines later, he says, in the middle of his Gimel, and he tells to the Rambam, the Kaif and HaMeitzarim, that the nefesh hapnimi wants to do mitzvahs. The nefesh hapnimi v'yid is misameach in Torah. Ha'umnam b'dvarim harayim muter l'moid nefesh shagam l'nefesh yesh tzar mitzaros Yisrael. V'lachein af gam sheb'dvarim harayim have a Torah v'simcha. Says America Kazakh. He says every limud Torah that a person learns, on the one hand it's nesameach, on the other hand the person has tsar because there's a tsar of the igiyah. But the tsar of the igiyah of harving and learning is batal l'umas the simcha that the nefesh ha'Yisraeli is nesameach and simchas haTorah. And even if a person doesn't consciously feel the simchas haTorah, but Torah is be'etzem sameach. The school of Torah is Pekudei Hashem Shar Masam Chelev. When a person learns Dvarim Arayim, then l'umas the simcha that the nefesh is masik and limud Torah, the nefesh also is masik tsar mitzad the Dvarim Arayim. So that tsar is mevatel simcha. So Kumtais had to learn Dvarim Arayim is not because the pasuk of Pekudei Hashem Shar Masam Chelev doesn't apply to Dvarim Arayim. Avad applies to Dvarim Arayim also. But the tsar that the nefesh is masig mitzad the yonei achurban or the yonei avelus, which are nisayrer ayday the Dvarim Arayim, that's mevatel the simcha, and therefore it's mutter to learn Dvarim Arayim. And based on this, he wants to say chiddush. We're going to come back to this mitzvah later on in the shir. The Aruch HaShulchan wants to mechadish based on this that in Eis Daled that it's mutter to learn the Dvarim Harayim Bein. We're going to see there's a big shal about this, but the Aruch HaShulchan wants to say based in the Shtikol Torah that it should be mutter to learn the Dvarim Harayim even Bein. Why? So he says in Eis Daled, "L'fizani Yomer, dini mefarsha shulchan aruch kosher tafil b'Dvarim Harayim ein mutter lakreis v'lei lahamikol falpol u'be'emes hadavar kosher noi l'tav chacham alevik shebal karchach kaseichel yachshev kushim v'teres v'kayetz b'zeh ach l'fi ma shekasavnu as yishaper tavadai tam u'mesikas haTorah yesh b'chol divrei Torah af b'Dvarim Harayim ela shatzar mevatel hasimcha im kain afi mechadish eze chiddush im kozel and his batel hatzar shel hatzaros." So the Aruch HaShulchan that even a person learns Dvarim Harayim Be'iyun, so fine, there's simcha, but there's still tsar. There's always simcha. When you learn Dvarim Harayim Shlei Be'iyun, you also have simcha. Every word in the Torah is misameach. Pekudei Hashem Shar Masam Chelev. It's a mitzias in the that the Eibishter put in the mitzias HaTorah. That every word of the Torah is misameach. Even if a person doesn't consciously feel it, it's there. The nefesh ha'Yisraeli be'etzem is misameach and simchas HaTorah. Elamai, the tsar is mevatel simcha. So what's enough to mean if I learn Shlei Be'in, if I learn it Be'in, so I have more simcha, fine. So I have more simcha, and I have the tsar. It could even like two. He says in the parentheses that it could be the more that a person learns a Be'in, there's taka more simcha and there's more tsar. He's mistar biyunai. So the tsar is always tit for tat. The tsar is always going to be mevatel simcha. That's the sheet of the Aruch HaShulchan, that Torah is be'etzem sameach. They had to learn Dvar Marayim is because Dvar Marayim is mevatel simcha, and that is mutter even to learn biyun. Now, according to the Marsha, it's pashat. According to the Marsha, if the issur of learning Torah is not mitzat simcha, it's mitzat hesech hadas and avelus, then it's pashat why Dvar Marayim is mutter. Dvar Marayim is not masiyach das. It's pashat masiyach das. The issur is not mitzat the simcha. It's mitzat hesech hadas. So Dvar Marayim will remind a person of inyan avelus. But according to the Shulchan Aruch, according to Rashi, and the mashmois of the Mefarshim, that the issur of Torah and Tisha B'av is mitzat simcha, so then we have to say this chiddush of the Aruch HaShulchan, that even though Torah is misameach, but the tsar of the Dvar Marayim, that dampens, and that's mevatel the simcha of the Torah. Okay, so this is the ikar halacha of Tisha B'av, that there's issur Talmud Torah, and there's a heter of Dvar Marayim. Now, here comes a big shaila, many achreidim talk about, and that is there a chiyuv of Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av? The pashtus l'chayr would be that the same way every day of the year there's a chiyuv of Talmud Torah, a person according to his capabilities and according to the time which is allotted to him, a person is mechuyev to be haygeh b'Torah, v'gisa b'yayim v'layla k'fi kaychay. L'chayr Tisha B'av and avelus should not be exception to this. Tisha B'av also there's a chiyuv of Talmud Torah. There are halakim of Torah which a person is not allowed to learn. There are halakim of Torah which a person is allowed to learn. So if a person finds a chiluk of Torah which is permissible for him to learn, he finds it's Dvar Marayim. A person has the kaychas, and a person has the time, and a person has the capabilities. Kipshutai, in this taka many achreinim neman, he should have a chiyuv Talmud Torah. Of course, there's the avodas hayom, there's davening, there's kinnis. But once a person finishes avodas hayom, and now he has, so to speak, free time on Tisha B'av, and during avelus, the person is the shtogdach sitting shiva, and he has some downtime. People are not coming to Menachem Avel. He's not being Isaac in the avodas hayom. Kipshutai, he has a chiyuv Talmud Torah. There's halakim of Torah that he's not allowed to learn, but he has to find a chiluk of Torah which he is allowed to learn. That's Dvar Marayim, and that there would be a chiyuv Talmud Torah. That's the pashtus, and that's taka how many achreidim Rav Yashiv talking them like this, and that's the pashtus that there is a chiyuv Talmud Torah. There is a very interesting Shabbat Leket. The Shabbat Leket in Seder Tainus Simin Reish Samich Tes. The Shabbat Leket Kedu is one of the Rishonim. So he quotes a Shita Sagainim, and the Gainim say the following. This is his lashon. Shabbat Leket Seder Tainus Simin Reish Samich Tes. Yesh Gainim Zal Sha'imrim She'im Mevarchim Birkas HaTorah. He's referring to Tisha B'av. Shahrei Asurim B'divrei Torah V'Midrashos B'Teilem. So the Shabbat Leket quotes that there are some Gainim that hold that on Tisha B'av we do not say Birkas HaTorah because we're Asur B'divrei Torah V'Midrashos B'Teilem. I guess it means the yeshivas, the Bati Midrashim are batal. There's no limit on Torah. Therefore, there's no Birkas HaTorah. As is Dr. Gainim. Now, the Shabbat Leket himself argues, and he says, "V'li nira shetzarechiyun, shaharei hu rashai likreis b'Torah, ubi iyov, ubi kinais, ubi dvar marayim shebiyirmiyah. Hilchos mavarach Birkas HaTorah, the kairei v'parshas Talmud b'lvad." So, the Shabbat Leket, he doesn't understand the sheet of the Gainim. Why shouldn't there be a chiyuv Birkas HaTorah? A person is mutter to learn Torah, dvarim harayim, iyov, kinais, dvarim harayim. So the halakim of Torah, the one is permissible to learn on Tisha B'av, and l'chayri is referring to Tisha B'av, l'chayri is referred to Avelos also. So why shouldn't you make a Birkas HaTorah on that? He has a chiyuv Birkas HaTorah, and v'kayri parshas Talmud. In other words, you can't see all the kabbanis. Only says the parshas Talmud. There's a shtukal about that. So Shabbat Leket is masik that one should recite Birkas HaTorah on Tisha B'av and Avelos, and that's taka the halacha. The halacha is that one does say Birkas HaTorah on Tisha B'av and Avelos. Now kipshutai, this stems with the way the pashtus is. The pashtus is that there's a chiyuv Talmud Torah Tisha B'av. There's an issur to learn Torah, the dvarim shahamesamchin. The dvarim harayim, there's no issur to learn. But whatever chiluk of Torah a person is allowed to learn, he has a chiyuv to learn. So you have a chiyuv to learn. There's a mitzvah Talmud Torah. The chiyuv Birkas HaTorah kipshuta is totally in the mitzvah and the chiyuv Talmud Torah. So if a person could learn dvarim harayim, whatever you could learn, he's mechuyev to learn. And if you're mechuyev to learn it, there should be Birkas HaTorah. And that's taka the maskan of the Shabbat Leket. So what needs to be understood is what is a pshat in the Gainim. The Gainim say there's no Birkas HaTorah. The Gainim say she'ein mevarchim Birkas HaTorah she'asur b'divrei Torah b'midrashos b'Teilem. Why would the Gainim say that there's no chiyuv Birkas HaTorah on Tisha B'av? The Shabbat Leket is gerecht. There's dvar marayim and kipshut there's a chiyuv Talmud Torah on Tisha B'av. It would seem that the Gainim talk argue. It would seem that the Gainim hold that Vibalt Tisha B'Av is a yom, l'chayr hu adin avelus, is a yom which is also b'Talmud Torah, even though there's a heter to learn Dvar Marayim, but being that there's a Isser Talmud Torah, it would sound like he holds that there's no Chiyuv Talmud Torah, and therefore there's no Big Torah. So this, as we mentioned, is a huge shayla in Achronim. So there is a sefer that many Achronim quote. There's a sefer called the Shevet Yehuda. It's brought down in the Kaf HaChaim. The Shevet Yehuda is in Yeridea, Siman Shin Pei Dalet Sifkat Dalet. It's quoted in the Kaf HaChaim. The Kaf HaChaim is in Siman Tov Kuf Dalet Sifkat Yud. And the Shevet Yehuda says the following. He says, Avol mutter bi'iyaivu b'kinais. Zok the Shevet Yehuda. He's from the Friedrich Achronim. Nira de mutter urishus ka'amar. When it says that an avol is mutter to learn Dvar Marayim, it's mutter urishus. Shemein writes a little way klal afilu b'Dvar Marayim rashai. If an avol doesn't want to learn Dvar Marayim, it's okay. It's mutter. He's not considered a mavatal Torah for not learning Dvar Marayim. Te'ein loymar de kevin do mutter. Don't tell me that Bibalt it's mutter to learn Dvar Marayim. Now it becomes a chiyuv. Don't tell me that. That's not true. Zok the Shevet Yehuda. The Kavan de Omar do potter b'Talmud Torah. Vibalta says in Shas that Oval is potter in Talmud Torah. Mashma de potter legamri. Being that the lashon Shas is that Oval is potter from Talmud Torah, the Mashmaya says he's potter legamri from Talmud Torah. V'im hu chayiv likreis b'Dvar Marayim v'lo sagi de lavachi. Harein pot. So the Shevet Yehuda says that an Oval, he's mutter to learn Dvar Marayim, but he's not mechuy to learn Dvar Marayim. It's a reshus, because the lashon of Chazal is that an Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. If an Oval will be chayiv to learn Dvar Marayim, mitzad the mitzvah of agisa b'yom v'layla, so we can't say that an Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. He's chayiv in Talmud Torah. Just as he is to learn Dvar Mesamchen, and is a heter to learn Dvar Shein Mesamchen, but that is mechuy to learn. If it says potter, it sounds like it's potter from Talmud Torah. This is what the Shevet Yehuda says. Now the problem is, this many Achronim ask, Yashiv is brought down the Yassis Gasha, and it's brought down from the Kleisenberger, that there's no such Gemara. There's no Gemara that says that the Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. The Gemara says the Oval is also from Talmud Torah. The Gemara doesn't say the Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. He's quoting a Gemara, and we don't know where this. We don't know where this. He's sparring because it says potter legamri. We don't know where it says this. We don't know where in Shas it says that an Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. It says an Oval is also likreis. The lashon of Gemara we'll soon see in my cotton is that the Oval is also for Talmud Torah. It doesn't say that an Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. So adarabah, the lashon of Gemara will be mashma. Then the Oval has an isur libra Torah, and whatever things Chazal or matter there's mutter for him to learn. Talk like the svara that the Shevet Yehuda says that Chazar dover liyas chayva vein a rasha liyas eishva batal baksiv gisvei malayla. So we have a Shevet Yehuda on the one hand who says that an Oval is potter from Talmud Torah. There's no chiv Talmud Torah, but we're not sure what his mucker is. He sounds like he's quoting a Gemara, and we're not sure what his Gemara is. If anything, the lashon of Gemara is mashma that an Oval is not potter, he's aser b'Torah, but whatever he is allowed to learn, he would have a chiv Talmud Torah. Upon him, we have the sheet of the Shevet Yehuda who says that an Oval and l'chayra, we'll soon explain why, Hashem, but that the Oval and who had the Tishbav is potter for Talmud Torah. So now we understand what the Gainim are saying. The Gainim that Shabbai Lekar quoted, who say that there's no big Torah on Tishbav, fact the Shabbai Leket. What do you mean? There's a heter to learn Dvar Marayim. So l'chayra, the Havan of the Gainim will be based on the Shevet Yehuda. They learn that Vibal Tishbav is a Yayim, and who had an Avelus l'chayra. Vibal Tishbav is a Yayim, which is also for Talmud Torah, and it's only mutter to learn Dvar Marayim. That shows me, we'll soon explain why, Hashem, but that shows me that Tishbav is a Yayim, which is potter for the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, like the lashon of the Shabbai Leket b'shem the Gainim Hamidroshais b'Teilim. So therefore, that's why the Gainim hold that there's no chiyuv b'iksa Torah. L'chayr the Shabbai Leket argues, kepshutai, he argues, and he holds like the Achronim ask on the Shevet Yehuda that there's no such Gemara, and if anything, Avelus and Tishbav is chayav in Talmud Torah. There's a isser to learn Dvar Mesamchen. There's a heter to learn Dvar Shein Mesamchen. So whatever you're allowed to learn, it's chazar liyas chayva, and therefore there would be a chiyuv. There would be chiyuv b'iksa Torah. That's the chayra what the shaila machlekes the Gainim and the Shabbai Leket is telling you. Now, even though there is, so I see somebody asked a shaila over here. It's a very good shaila. We're going to talk about this a little bit. Why is this different than Nashim? Same in Nashim make b'iksa Torah. Mistama, what you mean to ask is that Nashim aren't chayiv in Talmud Torah, and still Nashim make b'iksa Torah. So the Biskarov brings on Shem Reb Chaim that even though Nashim are not mitzvah in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but being that the bracha Birkas Torah is not a bracha on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, it's a bracha on the chefs of Torah. So Vibalt Nashim are shaykh to the chefs of Torah, they can also make a Birkas Torah. So what we mean to ask is that even according to the Shevet Yehuda, that an Aval is potter from Talmud Torah, but if he learns Torah, his leaving the Torah is considered leaving out Torah. He's not mufkat from Torah. He's potter from Torah. He's not mufkat from Torah. So why can't he make Birkas Torah? That's a good taina, and I think you're right. It could be there's taka pshat in the Shebei Leket. We said before that kipshuta the Shebei Leket holds like that chayim that say that an Aval is chayv in Talmud Torah, but enechanami according to the Briskarov's Havana in Nashim, that the reason why Nashim made Birkas Torah is even though they're not mitzvah in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but they can make the bracha on the chefs of Torah. One could say that that's prat in the Shebei Leket. It could be the Shebei Leket agrees with the Gainim that there's taka no mitzvah of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av, who hadn't availus, and still he would argue and say that there's still a makom to say Birkas Torah because Saf Kasaf he's mutter with Dvar Marayim. That shows that he's not mufkaf in Talmud Torah. Therefore, will be shaykh bracha. But the Briskarov's part is to chiddush. Not everyone holds like the Briskarov. There's many rise to this. I'm not going to go into this right now, but there are many that learn. There's a mashpais and the going like that in Shulchan Aruch. But there are many that learn that the chiv Birkas Torah is taka tolu in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So we'll be telling that shayla. If you learn that Birkas Torah is tolu in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, then we'll be muchach in the Shebei Leket that there is a chiv Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av, like many acharim say. If you say like the Chiddush of the Biskarov to explain why Nashim can make a bracha, is that even though there's no chiyuv Talmud Torah, but you can make a bracha on the chefs of Torah, as long as it's not moved off in Torah, then enechanami, one could say that the Shebei Leket also could agree to the Shevet Yehuda, that even if there's no mitzvah Talmud Torah, it's still shaykh to make a Birkas Torah, that's in chefs of Torah itself. Very good. Now, even though there's no Gemara, there is a Rashi in my cotton that the Velt is Medaikin. There's a Rashi in the Ritva, is Medaikin this, that's Meduik, that's taka no chiv Talmud Torah by Aval. Rashi says in my cotton daf chafal from Aleph. So Rashi is going on this halacha that an Aval is aser b'Talmud Torah. So Rashi says, Rashi has a kasha. It's not clear if Rashi and tightness is Rashi or not Rashi, whatever it is, but whoever it's a chashviyid, whoever the Mefarish and tightness is. So Rashi there has a kasha. Ha da amar Aval chai b'chol mitzvahs. In fact, Rashi Akasha, how could we say that the Aval is also likris b'Torah? The Gemara says in Sukkah that Aval is chayv in all mitzvahs, chutz b'nat tefillin. And for Rashi, hasam shar mitzvahs ba'alma. Aval hani is busimcha. So Rashi answers that when the Gemara says in Sukkah that the Aval is chayv in kol mitzvahs amuris b'Torah, that's referring to shar mitzvahs. But these mitzvahs, the mitzvahs of Torah, but the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, that tak and oval isn't chayiv because they have simcha. Now, if you learn that an oval is chayiv in the midst of Talmud Torah, just he's osir lilmaid, and when it comes to dvarim harayim, he's taka b'chuyiv in Talmud Torah. What's Rashi's kasha? All the Gemara says in Ma'ikon Chafalf is that oval is osir b'kriyas Torah. What the Gemara says in Sukkah is that oval is chayiv in all mitzvahs, chutz b'nat tefillin. That's true. He's chayiv in Talmud Torah also. He's chayiv to learn dvarim harayim. The chalakim of Torah which he cannot learn. It's an Isser, also Isser Avelus, because that's Misameach. Whatever chalakah of Torah which are not Misameach, he's Takachai of Talmud Torah. So what was Rashi's kasha in the first place? And Rashi answers no. The rule that it says that Avos is Chayv and Kol Mitzvahs Muris Torah, that's mitzvahs the Alma. But the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, which has Simcha in it, Zok Rashi, that's not the Gemara and Sukkah. And Avos is not Chayv in that mitzvah. So the Chayr is clear in this Rashi, like it says in the Shevet Yehuda. Shevet Yehuda says there's a Gemara that says this. We don't know where this Gemara is. Rashi is Meduyik that the rule that the Gemara says in Sukkah, the Oval Chai b'chol mitzvahs amuris b'Torah doesn't apply to Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is an exception because Talmud Torah is a mitzvah that has simcha. We're going to soon try to explain this mitzvah Hashem why that's a reason to pater from Talmud Torah. But Rashi says being that Talmud Torah is a mitzvah that has simcha, therefore an Oval is not Chai in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And when the Gemara says in Sukkah that it is Chai b'chol mitzvahs, that klal has an exception, and the exception is Talmud Torah. So the Chayr be Meduik and Rashi that the Oval is taka potter, and the Chayr who had in Tishvav is potter for the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Similarly, this is also B'Shleim Zalman and that Shuv and Micha Shleima is Medaik in the Ritva. The Ritva is also my cotton earlier on Tezvav and Aleph. The Ritva also asks the same kasha. The Ritva asks, "Yikasha lecha, Darmin and Oval also with the Torah." The ilu hasavar minan shu chai b'chol mitzvahs amoris v'torah chutz minat tefillin. Ve'ishloimar she'ein lemeidim min haklalos afilu af al pi shenamar ben chutz. V'hacha pshita lei da'asur b'divrei Torah she'ein mesamchei leiv. So Ritva says that there's a rule in the Gemara that klalos are not could have exceptions, even even where it says the exceptions, there could be other exceptions. And here there's an exception to the rule. The exception to the rule is Torah because mesamchei leiv. So again, the Ritva says like Rashi that Torah is an exception to the rule. Then the Ritva says v'oidei shleimar tekevon tekayre kriyas b'shachas arvis bahado sagila k'is b'seif menachas v'nimtza she'enoi patur mimena. So it's clear in the Ritva that these are mamish the two truths of the Ritva. The first territory Ritva, like Reb Shlomo Zalman is B'dayik, like it's B'duyik and Rashi, is talking B'duyik that the oval and Tishbav is patur from Talmud Torah. The Baal Torah is mesamchei leiv, and oval is not chayiv in Talmud Torah. And the rule that it says that oval is chayiv b'chol mitzvahs amuris, but Torah doesn't apply to the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. That's the first territory of the Ritva, and like we're saying in Rashi, Oidei Shleimar that the Baal and oval is kriyas mashachas v'arvis. Could have said Dvarim HaRav also. I don't know why it doesn't say that. But Bilan on Oval is Kriyas Rashachas V'Arvis Nimtza She'enei Potter Mimena. He's not part of a Talmud Torah, and therefore it's not a steer to the rule that Oval is Chayav B'Chol Mitzvah. He's not Chayav B'Talmud Torah. So this Shaila of the Achronim is mamish these two truths from the Ritva. If an Oval is part of a Talmud Torah, or an Oval is Chayav in Talmud Torah. Now, but this needs a hesber. What's talk of the Hezbollah? What's talk of the Svara? Why should the Oval and Hud and Tishbav? We showed to the Ga'inim say they don't be Zopik Satira, and we have a Rashi, and we have a Ritva that's Mavur, that there's talk of no mitzvah Talmud Torah and Oval and Tishbav. Why talk of not? What's talk of the Svara in that? L'chaira, the Svara is talking like the secondary to the Ritva. The Svara is that the mitzvah of a Gisa B'Yem Malai applies 24/7 and applies to every single day of the year. It's punkt on Tishbav and Avilos. There's things you can't learn. Whatever you could learn, l'chaira there should be a Chiv Talmud Torah. What's a Svara that there shouldn't be a mitzvah Talmud Torah and Tishbav? Now Rashi and the Ritva say because Torah is misameach. Now the fact Torah is misameach is a reason why you're not allowed to learn. But why is that a reason to mafkiya the Chiyuv Talmud Torah? So the Welt says, and he say this a beautiful mahalach, and they say like this. They say that there's a lot of rayas that the simcha that a person has b'shas he learns Torah and the kishmak that he has when he learns Torah, that's not a zaytik azach. That's a chiluk of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. There's a very, 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 very famous Egletal in Akdama, that Egletal says that a person should not think that if a person enjoys his learning, a person has geshmak in his learning, and he has a simcha in his learning, that's called Torah Shalal Lishma. That's not true. That's called Torah Lishma, because the tzuras mitzvah of Talmud Torah is to have a geshmak in the learning. The tainug, the vaharivna, the geshmak, the tainug, the simcha that a person has, the shas libna Torah, that's a chiluk of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's not a zaytik gazach that comes that stares the lishma of the Torah. That's the chefts of libna Torah. The chefts of libna Torah is that a person should be misanig in the libna Torah. And there's a very famous from Avram ben Nahar that the Welt says. Avram ben Nahar, he's one of the Rishonim in Maseches Nedarim, Daf Chesed Aleph. He says he said, we know that there's a rule that mitzvah is lav lahanis nitno. So Avram ben Nahar says that doesn't apply to Talmud Torah. And he says, Mirdik l'shaynis. Avram ben Nahar, Nedarim and Chesed Aleph. He says the following. So leishayich time of the mitzvah lav lahanis, ela the mitzvah sheitului b'maisa. Aval mitzvahs limud, shehu inyan tzir halev v'yidias emes, the mitzvah of libna Torah, which is tzir halev v'yidias emes, ikar hatzivwehu kedei l'tzayir ha'emes, the ikar mitzvah is to be misbainin about the emes of Torah, uli hisaneg v'lehanais b'mada l'sameach l'vavay b'sichlei. The ikar mitzvah is to mitzayir the emes and to have a geshmak in the learning and to enjoy b'mada l'sameach l'vavay b'sichlei, that a person should be misameach himself in Torah. K'dichsiv k'kudi Hashem Ashar Masam Chelei Hilchos leishayich l'meimar b'mitzvahs Talmud Torah d'lei nitin l'hanais. The rule that the Gemara says in many places that mitzvah is lav l'hanais and Nuzak B'Avam in Nahar doesn't apply to Talmud Torah. Why? She'ikar mitzvasa yiyanav atainug b'ma shemasig u'mevin b'limudai. The ikar mitzvah, murder gesprach, the ikar mitzvah Talmud Torah is the hana and geshmak that a person has when a person fashtays his learning. Zok B'Avam in Nahar and Azayis is before, like we mentioned in the Egletal, that the tainug and the geshmak that a person has in limud Torah is not a zayt gezach. That's a chiluk of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. the tzura of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is to enjoy the Talmud Torah and to have a simcha and to have a tainuk, to have a geshmak in the Talmud Torah. And that's why Rav Nahar says there's no rule of mitzvahs lav l'hanastinu when it comes to the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So based on this, many want to say that would be a possible hesber as to why Tisha B'Av and Avelus doesn't have a chiyuv Talmud Torah. If the tzura of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is, like the Rav Nahar says, like the Gital say, the tzura of mitzvah is that a person should be misanig b'divrei Torah, that a person should be misameach, that a person should harvest to understand the Torah and should come to a madrega of simchas HaTorah, that a person should be misanig b'limudai on a day when a person cannot do that because of the restrictions of Tisha B'Av and Avelus, on a day where he's forbidden to be misanig b'Torah. It's not mistaver that the Torah should mechayiv him to do that mitzvah. When the Torah is mechayiv him the mitzvah Talmud Torah, there's a svara that the Torah is only mechayiv him to do the mitzvah if the mitzvah could be niskayim b'shleimus in its ikr tzura. If the ikr tzura of the mitzvah Talmud Torah is to be misameach b'limudai on a day when a person cannot learn the Torah, but even where he's misameach b'limudai, and the only Torah that he can learn is Dvar Marayim, which the tsar of that Torah is mevatel the simcha that he has b'shas l'ibnat Torah. So it's mistaver that on such a day the Torah was mechayiv in Talmud Torah. On a regular day, a person is shaykh to misanig b'Torah. So even let's say a person bumps into a shver sugya and he doesn't have a geshmak in it, avad he's chayiv in Talmud Torah. He'll work and he'll get a geshmak, but it's a day where he's shaykh to the musik of Tainug Torah. But on Tisha B'Av, or during a zman of avelus in the shagadach, if a person is not shaykh to the tainug of Torah because it's usher for him to learn the chiluk hamsamchum of Torah, because it's usher to misanig in Torah, so just to mechayiv him to learn Torah, just the dvar marayim, which is not misameach, there's a stark asfar to say that the Torah was a mechayiv. This could be a possible hesber in Rashi and the Ritva, that they say that the reason why there's no chiv Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av and avelus is because Torah is misameach. What do they mean? Because Torah is misameach. What do they mean? The Torah is not misameach. So what they mean is because the Torah is misameach. The ikr tzur is a Torah, so Torah v'simcha. So if you can't be misameach in the Torah, there's no chiyuv Talmud Torah. I see somebody asked a shayef about learning Bein. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. There's another mahalach that's brought down by Yaakov Kamenetsky to explain why there's no chiyuv Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av. It says it's brought down that they asked Yaakov Kamenetsky if there's a chiyuv Talmud Torah in Tisha B'Av. He says he's not sure, but if there isn't, this is the svara. And he says the following. He says, we mentioned earlier that there's a very big shaila in the achreinim if it's mutter to learn the dvar marayim be'iyun. So now we're going to talk about this a little more about Riches. So the Paiskim say, the Paiskim in Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Kuf Nun Daled Sif Beis, Sif Aleph, Tov Kuf Nun Sif Aleph. So here the Mechar Paskins that there's Isser Talmud Torah in Tisha B'Av. So the Magen Avram and the Taz often learned. The Magen Avram in Ois Hey. Nearly the high time also a little bit Eza Jewish Kusha B'Tir Tzafil B'Dvar Marayim Deisha Simchi Love. So Magen Avram says that it's also to be mefalpel in Dvar Marayim because that's Mesameach. The Taz also says in the end of Sifkat Beis, when times are nearly da feel welcome to mutter lulmaid, hainu shilmaid pshutan shal dvarim, avaloi derech pilpul. Da feel be here the fires davar chamer also in time she the simcha akashi sashafar. Okay, dear ladies, so Taz also says like the Magen Avram that it's also to learn to be ma'ayin, to be mefalpel in the dvarim harayim because the iyun will bring a person to simcha. And this taka the mishabura paskins. Now we mentioned. Yeah, I guess it only applies to Tisha B'Av. See, someone asked up to the 9 days. I guess the darga. This is only the darga of Avilos of Tisha B'Av. The darga of Avilos of the 9 days doesn't. I mean, we're allowed to learn Torah during the 9 days. Adrabah, the Mishabura says, "V'Torah v'tfil tia b'simcha." It's only on the 9 days. It's only in Tisha B'Av itself where there's mamash. It didn't have Avilos B'dina. That's where they answered the chalakim of Torah, which is b'sameach. So that's the sheet of the Magen Avram and the Taz, and that's how the Mishabura passes. We mentioned earlier that the Aruch HaShulchan argues. And the Aruch HaShulchan says that there's a heter to learn Dvar Marayim Be'iyun, and that is because even though it's misameach, but the tsar of the Dvar Marayim, that's mevatel the simcha of the Dvar of the Libna Torah Be'iyun. So we have a shaila in the achreinim if it's mutter to learn Dvar Marayim Be'iyun on Tisha B'Av. It's brought down B'Shem the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Leib Steinman quotes the Chazon Ish that the Chazon Ish said halacha that it's mutter to learn the Dvarim HaRaim Be'iyun HaTisha B'Av. Shmur is not this, but the Chazon Ish paskins that it's mutter to learn Dvarim HaRaim Be'iyun HaTisha B'Av, and it's brought down in the Heintiges Farm. He asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Shlita, and he also said that he corroborated this, that the attack of the sheet of the Chazon Ish that's mutter to learn Dvarim HaRaim Be'iyun HaTisha B'Av. Now the hesber that's given, Rabbi Leib Steinman Zatzal, who's masber, that the pshat in the Chazon Ish, he says Gazach, he says the reason why the Chazon Ish said he could learn Dvarim HaRaim Be'iyun HaTisha B'Av is because the Chazon Ish held that learning B'li Iyun heisish galent. If a person learns without Iyun, that's not kol limud. So if Chazal said that it's mutter to learn the Dvarim HaRaim, they said lilmaid. They didn't say to daven, they said lilmaid. Learning means Be'iyun. Learning means to understand what you're learning. Of course, there's dargas and dargas and dargas of Iyun, but the basic learning to understand, to have a havana what you're learning, and havana means that if you're learning something, you have a kasha, you have to think about the kasha, and you have a teretz, you have a teretz. Having a kasha and a teretz, that's basic havana and limanat Torah. So Zok the Chazon Ish, to learn Torah not be Iyun, heisish galant. So if Chazal said that it's mutter to learn the Dvarim HaRaim, it must be their matter learning the Iyun, because learning Shlei B'Iyun is ish galant. So still different Sfar than the Sfar of the Aruch HaShulchan. That's what the Chazon Ish said. The Sfar bring down that Rav Yashiv, he didn't agree with this. He said that it should come out according to the Chazon Ish, that if a person learns Torah below Iyun, you can't make Big Torah on that. That the only type of Torah that a person can make Big Torah is on Limud B'Iyun. It should come out that a person should say Big Torah after, he should have to open a Big Shmuel and learn B'Iyun, Le Shamanu. I mean, the Minig HaElam is that we say Yevarechach afterwards, Eilu Dvarim. I think most people, they daven it, they don't learn it B'Iyun. So I guess you have to say that even according to the Chazon Ish, it doesn't mean it's not considered a kiyum of Talmud Torah. About Kabbanim, the Chazon Ish is saying that similar to what we said before from the Eglei Tzal and Bavram Nahar, that the Iker, they say, they knech more that the Iker Tzura, the Iker mitzvah Talmud Torah is the Tainug and the Simcha and the Geshmak that he has in Talmud Torah. The Chazon Ish is saying that the Iker is the Iyun, that the person who learns Torah, the Tzura of Talmud Torah is that a person should learn Torah b'Havana, understand what he's learning. If he has a kasha, to ask a kasha, to think of the teretz of the kasha. The Havana that he has, b'shas limanat Torah, and learning the Torah b'Havana, that's the Iker Tzura of limanat Torah. That the Chazon Ish holds that if Chazal said that you can learn Dvarim HaRaim and Tisha B'Av, it must be the Chazal matter to learn B'Iyun. Because if you're not learning B'Iyun, Heisish Galent. So let's go back to Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said that if you'll Neman, not like the Chazon Ish, if you're Neman like the Magen Avram, like the Taz, like the Mishabura, that to learn B'Iyun on Tisha B'Av is Aser, then we could explain why on Tisha B'Av, why by Velus, there's no mitzvah Talmud Torah. Because again, if leaving our Torah B'Iyun is also on Tisha B'Av, even if, the Chazon Ish is Zikr Gerecht, that the Iker mitzvah Talmud Torah is Limud B'Iyun. Whether that's a svara to say that Chazal will matter Limud B'Iyun on Tisha B'Av or not, that's a shalom nachreinim. But the Etzem Yisrael, the Chazon Ish says, everyone agrees to, that the Iker Tzur of Limud Torah is to learn with Havana. And when you learn something, you learn a Gemara, you learn a Shach, whatever you're learning, to have a kasha, to ask a kasha, to give a teretz, the Iker Tzur of Talmud Torah is to learn b'Havana. So if Chazal asked to learn Torah B'Iyun on Tisha B'Av, so then I can't be Mekayim the mitzvah, Bishlei Musay. The mitzvah Talmud Torah, the Iker Tzur as a mitzvah was given that a person should learn Torah b'Havana, and if you can't learn the Dvarim HaRaim B'Iyun, there's a svar to say that on such a day, the Torah wasn't Mechayev, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So by even there comes out, Devaila, what we're saying is that there seems to be two roots of it. It seems to be machlokes. Is there a mitzvah of Talmud Torah and Tisha B'Av? Just there's a Isser to learn Sh'ar Dvarim, and there's a Heter to learn Dvarim HaRaim, or like the Mashmois and Rashi, the Mashmois in the first teretz of the Ritva, that there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah, no chiv Talmud Torah on Avelus and during Tisha B'Av. So the svara why there wouldn't be a mitzvah of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av during Avelus, so either the first Malach, the Velt says, is because based on Neglatal and based on the Yisod of Bavram Nahar, that the Iker mitzvah of Talmud Torah is the Iyun and the Simcha and the Tainug and the Geshmak that a person has in his learning. And if it's not, and everyone agrees that that's also in Tisha B'Av. Even those that are matir to learn the Iyun, everyone is masking that the Tainug and the Simcha that one has, b'shas libat Torah, it's also in Tisha B'Av. That's a steer to Pikudei Hashem Yishar Mesam Kelev. Therefore, it's not mistaver that the Torah was mechayiv a person to learn Torah on such a oifen that he can't be mechayiv the mitzvah b'shleimusay, or the way Rabbi Yankov says, particular different knech, that if you name on like the achreinim, that libun ater be'iyun is also in Tisha B'av, Chazinish is mekel, and the Aruch HaShulchan is mekel. But if you name on that libun ater be'iyun is also on Tisha B'av, so then right you can say about the ikar tzura of Talmud Torah is that a person should learn b'havana. So if a person learns, if on Tisha B'av you can't learn be'iyun, you can't learn with havana, there's as far to say that Chazal weren't mechayiv, the Torah was mechayiv on such a day, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Okay, so that's the shmuz. Is there a mitzvah of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'av? Just this is an isser of Shar Dvarim, where it's talking about mitzvah of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'av. Now you could also say, let's go back to the Gainim for a second. The Shubelika quoted the Gainim who said there's no Bixar Torah in Tisha B'av. So we said until now that it would sound like that the Gainim are learning, they're going like the Shevet Yehuda or like the Mashpais and Rashi, or like the first Torah to the Ritva, that there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av. You could say, well, no, maybe the Gainim agree that there's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av. But the bracha of Bixar Torah is Lasik v'Divrei Torah. And the bracha is V'harav no Hashem Elokeinu Divrei Sirascha B'finu. So it could be that even if you don't say, even if you'll name on like most Achredim, the Pashtus is that there's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av, but you can't make the bracha because you can't have the Geshmak of learning on Tisha B'av. We were saying until now that Vibald, you can't have the Geshmak of learning on Tisha B'av. That might be as far to say there's no Chiv Talmud Torah in the first place. Even if you say not like that, and you say that there is a mitzvah and a Chiv Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av, but Yizurcha can't have the Geshmak of Torah in Tisha B'av, and according to the Mishabura, you can't learn Be'iyun, so that could goof be as far away, it'll make Bixar Torah. We could say that even the Gainim hold that there's a Chiv Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av, and there's a mitzvah Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av, but besides the bracha Bixar Torah, where it's a Birkas Haidah on Torah, and the Nusach HaBracha is Lasik v'Divrei Torah. V'harav no Hashem Elokeinu Divrei Sirascha B'finu. These inyanim that were masked in the bracha, the inyan of Asik HaTorah and the inyan of V'harav, which are both inyanim which are also on Tisha B'av, Lefi the Mishabura and the Achreinim, they can't learn Be'iyun on Tisha B'av. So that could go for big as far why I don't say Bixar Torah on Tisha B'av. We don't have to say anymore that the Gainim hold that there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah. They could agree there's no that they could agree that there's a Chiv Talmud Torah in Tisha B'av, but the bracha of a Harvna wouldn't pass. The bracha of a Harvna wouldn't pass on Torah that a person learns without a geshmak and shlei be'iyun. Okay. Now we mentioned in the beginning of the shir that Rashi and Tainus, and that's the Mashpais and the Shulchan Aruch, is that the reason why you can't learn Torah in Tisha B'av is mitzad halacha of misamchei lev, because Torah is misameach. The truth is, Marsha is B'dayik in the Gemara, that the Gemara only brings the misamchei lev after the din of Tineke Shabbos Rabban. So the Marsha says, Ilule Rashi, he would say that the Isser of learning Torah on Tisha B'av is not mitzad the din of Simcha, it's mitzad the din of Hesach Hadas. The same way there's a minhag not to do malacha, so but there's an Isser malacha on Tisha B'av mitzad Hesach Hadas from Avelus. There's even halachas during the 9 days that were niska and mitzad Hesach Hadas from Avelus. So too, the Isser of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'av is mitzad Hesach Hadas from Avelus. Okay, so based on this, the Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Tov Kuf Nun Daled, Sif Gimel, Yesh bi she'oser lilmoid ayidehira. Shulchan Aruch says there are some that say that it's also even to mahar her b'divrei Torah and Tisha B'av. I think this is based on a Maril, that some say that it's also even to mahar b'Torah on Tisha B'av. So on Tisha B'av, not only is limud Torah aser, even here her b'divrei Torah is also aser. So it sounds that the Poskim are medayik that this halach is only brought down in Tisha B'av, and Avelus is not brought down that there's an isser to mahar her b'divrei Torah. This chumrah of not being mahar b'divrei Torah, it's mashma that's only on Tisha B'av. It sounds like during Avelus, the Mechaber doesn't mention this halacha that one may not be mahar her b'divrei Torah during Avelus. So the question is, what's an afkamina? If you wouldn't like Rashi Kipshutai, that the isser of learning Torah is mitzad b'samchei lev, why should there be an afkamina between Tisha B'av and between Avelus? So there's a sefer called the Das Kedoshim. The Das Kedoshim is from the Eish Lavram, from the betshah. So he writes in Hilchos Avelus, Siman Shin Pei Daled Sif Aleph. The Das Kedoshim says, he says, Shemasha Matzanu b'Tisha B'av Miniya B'Hirher. This that we find at Tisha B'av, that one may not be mahar b'divrei Torah, Ein lul moed la'avol misham. We can't learn Avelus from Tisha B'Av. Ki b'churban Beis HaMikdash gam bebati gavai. What he means is that in the Chur Beis HaMikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was beichel to Gemara and Chagiga, even bebati gavai, meaning that there is a very strong Avelus on Tisha B'Av. Umufurish b'Tisha B'Av shaloi lahasiach das. Ma she'ein kein be'avel yesh rak miniya al simcha al sha'simcha be'mane piv ma she'ein kein be'hirur. Sagt der Mörder gesagt, sagt der Das Kedoshim, that there's taken off communion between Avelus and between Tisha B'Av. When it comes to Avelus, their taka, there's no Indian of Shaloi Lasiach. I mean, the Isser Talmud Torah Avelus is clearly Mitzat Simcha. There's not Mitzat Shaloi Lasiach Das in Avelus. There, if the Isser is Mitzat Simcha, their taka, the Mechaber says, that here is Mutter. We don't find the here is Aser. Because he says that the Ikra Simcha is Dafka from Diburim of Torah, but to be Mechashav Divrei Torah, there is a level of Simcha, we'll soon see about that, but that's not the Simcha that Chazal Aser. The Simcha that they Aser is only the Simcha of Divrei Torah, not the Simcha of Mahar and Machshava in Torah. So that's when it comes to Avelus, to be Mahar b'Torah's Mutter. Mashayk, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, there even here is Aser. Ki b'churim Beis HaMikdash gam bebati gavai umufurish b'tishav shel l'siach das. On Tisha B'Av there's Isser of Hesach Hadas, and Hesach Hadas even here her would be considered a Hesach Hadas from Avelus, as is like the Das Kedoshim. So it would seem that the Das Kedoshim is going with the Marsha. He's going with the Havana of the Marsha that the Isser on Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av is beside Hesach Hadas, not Mitzat Simcha, and he's saying that by Avelus, their taka is Mitzat Simcha. Zok the Das Kedoshim, that's the reason why there's an afkamina between Tisha B'Av and between Avelus. On Tisha B'Av, where the Isser is Hesach Hadas, there that's Koil even hear her. Shaken on Avelus, where the Isser is Mitzat Simcha, one could say that Simcha is Dafka on Diburim and not on Machshava. That's what the Das Kedoshim says to explain why there's an afkamina between being Mahar on Tisha B'Av and being Mahar B'Avelus. However, this is only going with the Marsha. As we mentioned, the Shulchan Aruch says clearly that the Iker Isser of learning Torah on Tisha B'Av is Mitzat Simcha. In fact, the Magen Avram says on this halacha that you can't be Mahar b'Divrei Torah on Tisha B'Av. So the Magen Avram says in Sifkat and Hey, Afa Gav the hero lav kedibur dami, Karesh Kostav Simon Samach Beis, Shiny Halacha the Iker Taimul Mishum Simcha, Ubehiru Iker Simcha, Maril. So Magen Avram quotes to Maril that the reason why you can't marry is because of Simcha. The Magen Avram says clearly, it's not saying like the Das Kedoshim, he says clearly that Machshava has Simcha. So we're back to the Hara. So if we're going like the Mashpais of the Shulchan Aruch, that the Isser Talmud Torah and Tisha B'Av is Mitzad, Pekudei Hashem Mishar Misam Chelev, and the reason why here is Aser is because here B'Divrei Torah is also Misameach. So what will be the makam to be Mechalik? Why by Avelus here is Mutter, and why on Tisha B'Av, Avelus, and on Tisha B'Av, here is Aser. They're both Mitzat Simcha. So why would the Simcha, if here is included in Simcha, like the Maril says, like the Magen Avram quotes the Maril, if here is included in Simcha and here is Aser and Tisha B'Av, what will be a Sfar L'chalik to explain why here is Aser on Tisha B'Av and Mutter on Avelus? That's the Shaila which needs to be explained. So I saw a Meirdik Mahalach from the Lakewood Yeshiva, Rabbi Rucham Olshem Shlita. I saw this in his Kuntras. He has a Bein HaMeitzarim. I think right this week, that came out the full sefer, Tu Chalakim Yireach Mayadim and Hilchos Bein HaMeitzarim. So he wants to say Mahalach as follows to explain what the nafkamina is between Tisha B'Av and Avelus. He says Avad Elolam, we could say that both Tisha B'Av and Avelus, we say it as Al Simcha. But if you look at the Mekairis, the Gemara Ma'ikatan says, how do we know that the Aser is also Talmud Torah? The Gemara says in Ma'ikatan, there's a pasuk that says Hanik Daim. The Gemara Ma'ikatan says that there's a pasuk that says Hanik Daim, and from there we learn that the Aser Avos Aser b'She'el HaShalem and the Avos Aser b'Talmud Torah. Hanik Daim means a person has to be a daimim, a person has to keep quiet, a person has to be b'demima, he has to be a daimim, both from Divrei Torah and from She'el HaShalem. There's a Tosfos in Moed Cotton. The Tosfos is on Daf Chaf Aleph Med Aleph. Tosfos on Daf Chaf Aleph Med Aleph, the Cotton Dear Maskul also Likres. So Tosfos is Dana Shaila over here. Is a mutter to learn the Dvarim HaRayim on Avelus? We pass that it is. The Gemara only says Mefurish the Inyan to learn the Dvarim HaRayim only by Tisha B'Av. The Gemara does not mention learning Dvarim HaRayim by Avelus. So Taisus on Daf Chafal from Ralph in Ervin in my cotton, Dibur Maskav also Likreis. Taisus is down the Shiloh. Taisus says the following: the Shuvas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Zakeni Kasav Kerabbeinu Yaakov Hay Oyster Dimei Evloi Be'Eiv Ubekinais B'Dvar Marayim Shabiyariya. Rabbeinu Yaakov L'Chatchila he would ask for an oval to learn Dvar Marayim. Midulay Tani Labish Maitzin Kvaitishmav Shivitanis. Uvimezi Knusai Chazav Hitter. Bimezi Knusai he was matter to learn Dvar Marayim during Avelis. But L'Chatchila Rabbeinu Yaakov held that it's also to learn Dvar Marayim during Avelis. And it's Meduik in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't mention the heter of Dvar Marayim by Avelus. The Gemara only mentions the heter of Dvar Marayim in Tisha B'Av. Now, what would the Sfar L'Chalik be? Why would there be a Sfar to say that there's enough community between the Dvar Marayim on Tisha B'Av and the Dvar Marayim during Avelus? So there's a Meiri. The Meiri is in Moed Cotton on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph, and the Meiri says the following. The Meiri says, Aval Aser B'Divrei Torah. Midikavar achmadu Yecheskel Daim. Shaladas Ktsas Aser Af Bekinois V'Dvar Marayim. Af Al Pi Shehutra B'Tisha B'Av. Even on Tisha B'Av is Heter Dvar Marayim. Sheba'avel Hadavar Talui B'Shtika. U'B'Tisha B'Av Ein Talui Ela B'Tzar. Zok the Meiri Mir Gezach. Zok the Meiri. There's an Afkamina Avel in Tisha B'Av. By Avel, the Chiv is a Chiv Shtika. Stomach means also pasuk of Hanik Daim. That the chiv avelis is to be daim, to be b'demima. The chiv is a chiv shtika. Therefore, that is koil even to Dvar Marayim. Meshek and Tisha B'Av einay talui ela b'tzar. It's an inyan of simcha, and Dvar Marayim have tzar. So we have a site from the Meiri that there's an afkamina between the Isser Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av and the Isser Talmud Torah b'avelis. The Isser Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av, we're going now like Rashi and like the Shulchan Aruch. It's all simcha. It's all Pekudei Hashem Misharm Samchei Leiv. Because you have to be b'tzar. The Dvarim Harayim cause a person tzar, therefore it's mutter to learn Dvarim Harayim. Mashake and Avelus out there, the Isser is mitzad Hanik Daim. The Isser of learning Torah by Avelus is not mitzad tzar, it's because the pasuk says Hanik Daim, that a person is mechuyev to be b'demima, person has to be a shoysek. That's when Avol is also b'she'ela shalim, and Avol is also b'talmud Torah because he has to be shoysek. Zemil is up to Meiri, it comes out of Chumrah, that an oval should be also even Dvar Marayim, because a person is mechuyev to be a daimim, to be shoysek a Talmud Torah. Dvar Marayim is Talmud Torah. So that's shot in the Svara. This will be the Hezber and Rabbeinu Yaakov. Why Rabbeinu Yaakov says, why Rabbeinu Yaakov held the Chatchila, that even though Dvar Marayim is mutter on Tisha B'Av, it's aser and Avelus, because Avelus is an under din. It's a din of Hanik Daim that you have to be a daimim. The Ma'aseh Taisus and Allah is that it's mutter to learn Dvar Marayim. So Taisus in my cotton in the end he says. Also with the Torah, Shinam Hanik Dain and Mash Ba'Koil, ain't nearly Raya. Delay Ka'amar Elamidover Hamisamchay. Kid the Amar Betainis, Mishum Shinamar Pikud Hashem Mishar Misamchay Lev. So Tais my cotton, he bavarns him Iri's Taina. Tais my cotton says that even though there is a pasuk of Hanik Daim, but the Isser of Hanik Daim is defined by Dvarim Hamisamchay. Like the Gemara says, Pikud Hashem Mishar Misamchay Lev. But the Meiri, who is explaining what Rabbeinu Yaakov held lechatchila, he holds taka two halachas. There's a din of Hanik Daim, and there's a din of Mesameach. Even Tais that says Alibi De'emes that Dvar Marayim is mutter during Avelus, he's also masking that there's a halach of Hanik Daim. Just the Hanik Daim is restricted to Dvar Hamisamchim. So merely you could say as you could say when it comes to hear, you could say a very geshmaka vart to explain why there's an afkamina here on Tisha B'Av and here about Avelus. When it comes to Avelus, the side of the Isser is Hanik Daim. Daim means to be shaisik. Shtika is dafka dibur. Here is not a stira to shtika. So even if he Taisus that says that the din of Hanik Daim is dafka dvar mamsamchim, but what the Torah answered was, you have to be a daimim, you have to be shaisik for dvar mamsamchim. To be mahar here in dvar mamsamchim, that they didn't answer. So Mel Avelus is not to be here. When it comes to Tisha B'Av, there's no Hanik Daim. There's no pasuk of Hanik Daim by Tisha B'Av. By Tisha B'Av, it's straight to halacha of Pikud Hashem Mishar Misamchei Lev. Like because on Tisha B'Av, there's like the Meiri says, there's a halacha of tzar. There's a din that a person has to be mitzvah on the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So then, where the Torah answered, where Chazal answered the simcha itself, is taken on Afkamina here at Dibur, like the Magen Ram says b'Shem the Maril. Here also a simcha by Avelus, where the Isser is a din of Hanik Daim. And we see the Meiri even said that's also even Dvar Marayim. So even though we hold the halacha that Dvar Marayim is mutter, because we hold that the din of Hanekdaim is restricted to Dvar HaMesamchim, but it's a halacha of Hanekdaim. It's a halacha that you have to be a shaisik. It's a din that you have to be a shaisik from Torah. So here is not a steer to being a shaisik from Torah. Mashaike, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, where there don't say the din of Hanekdaim, Tisha B'Av is a straight isser of tsar, that a person has to be b'tzar on the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and Chazal asked her to be Mesameach. So then, the way the Magen Avraham says, B'Shem the Maril, it would come out that being that here has simcha, therefore here will be asr. So this is not like the Das Kedeshim. The Das Kedeshim is saying that here it does not have simcha. That's why here is mutter during Avelus, and he says the reason why here is asr during Tishvav is beside the Marshos din, als shalei l'siach das min Avelus. We should be able to admit Hashem that by learning the halachas of Tishvav and the Bein HaMeitzarim, we should be able to, with when a shalom aparms fasenu, the Ebrish Tuzalfen, we should be zeicher b'mehira to be as Mashiach Tzedkenu, and Mitzvah Hashem Sunday should be a yontiv, Tzayim Arvi, Tzayim Chamishi, Tzayim Ashvi, Tzayim Asiri should be nepach, the sasan and simcha b'mehira v'menu, Yerushalayim HaKodesh, we should be zeicher to be see Binyan Beis Hamikdash and HaRav Keren HaTorah. Amen. Yeshakayach.